Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at an update to one of Adidas' thickest daily trainers. It's the Adistar 2. What's wrong with it? Now before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this final synopsis is my own. I always like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Today we're taking a look at the Adistar 2. This is a neutral daily trainer, and according to Adidas, this is designed for those longer distance runs. And personally, I kind of like this for some of those easy miles or just recovery days. It works as like a highly cushioned or basically maybe even ultra max cushion daily trainer. So it does have a lot of cushion for the push-in. The midsole does get a little bit complex. We'll dive into that later. I'll also say there is something called the Adistar CS, which is actually have right here in the corner. And the CS stands for cushion support. So this is apparently the stability version of the Adistar 2. I don't know if they're coming out with an Adistar CS2. We'll see if that comes out later here in 2023. But there are two different versions of the Adistar: the CS, cushion support, and then the Adistar 2, which is technically just the neutral version. So CS, stability version; Adistar, regular neutral version. It kind of breaks it down for you. As far as the stats go, this shoe costs $130, which is a pretty good value considering how much shoe you get, and is in line with its peers of traditional daily trainers, if not a little bit cheaper. Now, because this shoe is so massive and you have a lot of solid premium materials, which I'll talk about later, it is going to be a little bit heavier, coming in about the same as last year at 11.25 ounces, which is a pretty darn heavy shoe, especially in today's age when a lot of shoes are kind of shifting towards the lighter end of things. So it really depends what you're looking for. It doesn't feel super heavy on foot just because I think it displaces that weight quite well with a large surface area, but it is going to fall on the heavier end of things with regard to the weight in comparison to all the other trainers out there. And according to Adidas, we lost 4.5 millimeters of stack height, which I'm not sure I believe, mainly because the shoe basically weighs the same as the previous version, and it doesn't look like it lost 4.5 millimeters of stack height. Now, I don't have the previous version to compare directly, but based on my best guess, it doesn't look like it truly lost almost 5 millimeters of stack height. But with all that being said, it does have 33 millimeters of stack height in the heel, 27 in the forefoot for a 6 millimeter drop, and this is all according to Adidas. So roughly the same kind of look as last year. I believe the only thing that changed is the upper, so we'll kind of get into that. Moving on to the upper, I will say it did fit true to size with regard to length. It may be a smidge narrow. I did find a little bit of tightness towards the front of the toe box, kind of tapers to a point here. I'm not a huge fan of that always. I do like a little bit of room for my toes and just a little bit more room in the forefoot. So with regard to length, it's fine, maybe just a tad bit narrow overall. Now the material the upper is made of is a synthetic kind of engineered mesh. It's incredibly breathable. You got a lot of airflow through this shoe, which will be quite nice as we get into the warmer months. We're still in the dead of winter, so it does make your foot a little bit cold, but it will be appreciated as things start to warm up. The upper is also supported by a large plastic overlay in the toe box region, which I find to work quite well. And you have these large Adidas bar overlays on the lateral and medial side, which also give the upper a little bit more support since it is a very thin layer of an engineered mesh. We also have an internal midfoot cage, which is supported by these fabric kind of pieces through the midfoot here. They're quite substantial. They fold over themselves across the upper and then go down the inside and connect to this like thin layer of engineered green mesh, which kind of acts as an internal midfoot cage, hugging your foot a little bit more tightly. You can notice where they end. It kind of stops right towards the forefoot area. You do notice it a little bit. It's nothing too bothersome, but you can feel it with your foot. Kind of wish it was just fully just kind of integrated into a second engineered kind of like sock liner, if you will. But I think the internal midfoot cage does work quite well, and the entire lockdown here is quite substantial just because you have so many materials hugging your foot, and it is a more snug experience. The tongue is non-gusseted and incredibly large. It's very well padded, comes up very tall. It's just a huge tongue. Kind of wish they'd pare it down a little bit. It's not a massive deal breaker. I'm just not a huge fan of super tall, super thick tongues. And when the shoe weighs 11.25 ounces, I think this is an easy area to cut weight or maybe kind of pare it down a little bit. As far as the ankle and Achilles padding goes, it's moderately padded and it's a very strict internal heel counter. This thing does not want to budge. The shoe is built like a tank, and the heel counter is no exception. It kind of ties into, pun intended, the great lockdown with this upper. Moving on to the midsole, still that dual density setup, same as last year, with repetitor foam towards the forefoot. It's going to be the white foam, which is an EVA based material, and it's going to be softer than the back half of the shoe, this blue foam, which is repetitor plus a much firmer, much harder material. Something interesting to note about the Adistar, which actually surprised me, is that the midsole in the Adistar 2 and 1, I believe, is completely different than the midsole and the Adistar CS. So this is the Adistar CS and this is the Adistar. The CS again stands for cushion support because it has this gray foam here, which is Repetitor Plus, that gives you a stability element to it. Now, it's interesting because the Adistar CS has this plastic energy drive that goes through the midsole, while the Adistar does not. So while they look similar, they are different. So if you're shopping and trying to compare the Adistar CS and the Adistar, that's the big difference. You just have Repetitor plus foam at the top, not at the bottom, and the rest of the white foam is Repetitor, and this has the energy drive while the Adistar does not. So kind of confusing because they look very similar, but the midsoles are different and do have a different experience. And even though the Adistar doesn't have the plastic energy drive through the midsole, it's incredibly stiff. This thing does not want to bend at all, which really does help you notice the rocker geometry, and it provides a very smooth experience once you get towards the front half of the shoe. Kind of rolls you and keeps you moving, which is very necessary for a shoe this big and heavy, and part of the reason it doesn't feel like the 11.25 ounces that this weighs. The one big caveat to note is the back quarter of the shoe, or back third if you will, has a very firm, hard experience because of that Repetitor plus foam. So if you heel strike or tend to land on that back part of your foot, it's a rather hard landing and then kind of rolls into the softer Repetitor foam. Now, if you haven't tried Repetitor foam before, it's not the softest, bounciest foam in the world. It's an EVA-based material. It does have a nice level of cushion to it, but it's not super soft and squishy, which makes it a very stable foam. It takes a little bit to break in my opinion, and it's also quite confusing because I don't understand why they made a stability version of the shoe. It's incredibly stable with Repetitor plus foam in the back, providing a very stable landing, and then the shoe is just rather stiff and on the firmer side of things, giving you a very stable experience. So they made a stability shoe of a shoe that's already stable, and that is kind of confusing to me. Your foot also does sink a little bit lower into the midsole, which kind of gives you walls of foam on both sides, enhancing the stability experience. So overall, it does have a nice kind of roll to it with the rocker geometry. Kind of flows along nicely, a nice level of impact protection, not the softest or bounciest foam ever, and a rather kind of firm, hard landing towards the back half. It's kind of a tale of two stories here, but it does roll along very nicely, has a nice flow to it, and doesn't feel as heavy as it looks. Moving on to the outsole, you get full-length Continental tire rubber coverage, kind of a premium feature on some of the Adidas shoes, and that's why we see it here. Part of the reason why this shoe weighs so much, and I think part of the reason why this shoe will last you quite a while. Didn't have any major issues, and I don't believe that the rubber coverage pattern, which does impact the flexibility on some shoes, impacts the flexibility here, mainly because the midsole is so thick and rather firm. It's not a very flexible experience. It's on the more rigid side of things. So I would just keep that in mind, but I thought the outsole worked quite fine and no major issues. Overall, the Adistar 2 is built like an absolute tank. This is like a unit of a shoe. The upper has a great lockdown. The heel counter is incredibly stiff. Your heel's not going anywhere. And the breathability of the upper I thought was superb. The only kind of qualm with the upper was the tongue. I think is a little bit too big and bulky, and I hope they pared that down in future iterations. The midsole has a very noticeable rocker geometry. It's very smooth. I think works for those recovery days or just days you want to knock out those easy miles and just kind of have some solid cushioning beneath your foot. Again, not the softest or bounciest, but this does provide a very stable, very smooth experience when the front half of the shoe. The back half is rather rigid, which I think does help with the stability, but it's quite interesting. It's a very firm back half and then a smoother front half experience to this shoe. So kind of depends what you're looking for. If you want a stable, kind of durable, long distance or recovery day daily trainer, I think this might work well. Some of the downsides are it is on the heavier end of things, coming in like 11.25 ounces, and the back half with that very firm Repetitor plus foam might be off-putting for some runners. But overall, I think it's quite comfortable. Looks pretty darn cool as well. And yeah, I don't know. I'll be curious to see what you guys think. So drop your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.